Okay, thank you. Let's talk about props design in relation to type systems. So, 4 questions up front. Who of you uses PropTypes? Who of you uses TypeScript? Cool. Who of you uses Flow? Oh, wow, less, but still. Who of you uses Reason? Amazing! Cool. All right, so now that we are all excited about types, let's start with our types. There are some things that might seem obvious and they're simple, but it really needs to build up to go to the more complex examples. Let's start with a story of like me roughly 2 years ago. I worked with a designer, engineer, and he was building basically our design system. And as soon, like he obviously didn't like that, because, but as soon as he figured out there's actually a shortcut for it, he loved it. So what happened is basically our design system had this props design. You could say a button is primary and it's a small button, although primary shouldn't be small, but yeah, you can do. Then you can do say it's there's a secondary large and so on and so forth, and then you get to this, and there's absolutely, it's not clear what it is. It's like, is it now primary, secondary? The specifications it's clear. It's like there can be either primary buttons or secondary buttons, but then you basically have to go back to product management or design or whatever and tell them like, if it's this, what should I even do? Because it's not clear. Small, large, no, I think you get the gist of it. So how can we fix this? You will see this a lot out in the wild. You see variant is primary and size is then small or large. That's at least better because you cannot do this like impossible states. This basically from here to here you make illegal states that shouldn't be happening impossible to actually use or implement for the users of the button component. Cool. Let's reiterate on this one more time. Arrow down. Cool. We can do up, down. It's absolutely not clear what it does. How should it be implemented? That said, I have friends, I think they would spend an hour to just make this happen to annoy me. But in reality, or usually you only have an arrow which is pointing to one direction. So like, how can we fix this? We can say the direction is down, for example. That's awesome. Now to another, and this is also based on a real world situation of mine, about a year ago or so. I tried this. Obviously, man, if there's up and down, there must be left. No. Nothing showed up on the screen. Like, okay, what's going on here? Not right, maybe? Could be. No, this obviously didn't also work. So I went to the docs. First thing, this is where for me it's not ideal anymore because I had to go somewhere else to actually continue with my coding experience. I went to the docs. This is the docs of Rebus of the version 2. Now there's a version 3 which doesn't even have an arrow. And by no means I want to bash on Rebus here because it's a really awesome library, but they didn't have any description of the props, what's available. So that means I didn't know, I wasn't able to figure out like, is this actually by design? Or also, is it a bug? Maybe I upgrade to 2.2. Do I get the fixed error? I don't know. The only way to figure it out was going to the code. So I went from my code to docs to someone else's code to actually figure out if this is a bug to then implement my own error. And you're like, you waste 15 minutes or 20 on something that should be totally obvious in your editor. Also I want to point out, I mean, these docs are probably better than most of what you have in like in-house UI libraries, and even some of the ones that are published out in the wild there. And so this is like, Rebus is awesome, just to let you know, but like the experience was for me like, I know we can do better. All right. So basically what we want is a clear description of like, it can be either this or that or that. Easy to fix if you let's say you talk to someone who is writing C++ or Java or whatever, they come to you like, obviously, I mean, there's a data structure for this. We have this since 20 years. It's called an enum. Well, we don't have that in JavaScript. It's like, yeah, too bad. Cool. So, what can we do? Type systems to the rescue. They can help us. So let's use with start off with PropTypes. PropType string is required. Cool. We want to make sure it's required. This doesn't help us at all. This is bad. Don't do this. If you want to limit it to a fixed set, then you can do this. It's one off. It's like either down or up, and the next person that uses it, when they do left, at least in the console, they see this error. They see like, hey, and I want to point out the error design especially is really nice, because if I type in left, it tells you exactly that it only can be down or up, so you get right away an answer of like, what are your options. That's cool. That said, that will be the last example of props I will show you, because there's one major problem with props here. It only shows you if you run the component in your browser, and then it shows it in the console. So if you do things like you remove a prop, like there might be 50 places in your code base where you use that prop, but you don't notice it right away. It completely gets slipped through the code review, and you have buggy code, broken code in production again. So props is like, it's useful. I mean, in general, like if you have nothing versus props, go with props, way better. Prop types, but yeah, in general, I will tell you why I recommend either one of the other three. So let's start with TypeScript. Enums, we talked about enums. Cool, we have enums. Let's do this. Let's declare an enum. Direction, we export it right away in the arrow component, and then we say the props interface, direction is direction, and then you can basically import the direction from arrow as well. I mean, you have to import the arrow, but I just wanted to do a minimal thing here to show you what you need to declare the direction, and that's fine. It's a bit verbose, and at least to me, if you know something, then let me know, but I haven't figured out what's a benefit over this, because you can do unions, string literal unions in TypeScript as well. So just use this. My first intuition when I started to this was like, there might be downsides. So what I tried is, I'm pretty sure it cannot autocomplete, and it can. So that's pretty awesome. If you're in your editor, you have just this the TS plugin set up. You just go there. You start on the equal sign. You know it's a string because you can hover over it and it tells you it's a string. And let's actually run this one more time. And you see the options that are available. And this is like compared to what I had with the arrow before, losing 20 minutes just to go into someone else's code. That's a huge time saver. And I mean, this is a super simple example. Yeah. And if I do something wrong, because I didn't even care about I just typed away, you get this warning. And the error message again here is like, props to the TypeScript team, because they show you exactly what are the options are that you have. Cool. So let's look at flow. What can flow do for us? You might notice it's exactly the same thing in this case as TypeScript. You have string literal unions. You can do this. You can define the props interface like this. You use it like this. And if you get the same autocompletion works fine. That's great. The only thing that I want to point out here where flow could be better, I mean, in general, like this is now ranting on a very high level, but flow could be better. They don't tell me what my options are. I mean, that would be nice. But yeah, I mean, it's one click away. You go into the component, just check out the props, the props type, and but yeah. So what about Reason? Reason has this or that, like an enum built into the language. And it's very concise. It's easy, like very concise to write, so you can do this and you're good. You get autocompletion, as we said. The error message is a bit longer, and what it has the same flaw, at least to me, as a flow. It doesn't tell me what are my options. It only tells me that left is not available in this constructor, this variant constructor. Cool. So now that we got through the simple example, let's get more to the fancy and interesting stuff. So what if you have something like you basically want to accept in a component A X if it's the first use case, but if it's the second use case, I want to have X as well, but there also must be Y. And there could be even like more use cases with more variations and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's all very abstract, so let's make this a real world example. Let's do a blog post component. In its simple version, like obviously both of them, I reduced the third and fourth and so on option, but both of them have content. There's like content always must be there, otherwise it's like it's not a post. Actually, this should be published, not post. That would make more sense. So content is always the same, or it's like it's a required string. That's an obvious type. But published at only exists when it actually is a post. Yeah. So let's look at how we can do this with TypeScript. As said, we skip PropTypes. They don't bring too much value that I want to go into it. So you want to do like with the strings, we basically want to do union again. Like to do this union type, like here we have this pipe character. So we say either it's a draft post or it's a publish post, and then we can define the content of these two interfaces. But like Reason has this clear distinction of like we have this special data structure, but we don't have variants or enums in JavaScript. So TypeScript did add enums, but they didn't have like content for enums. So what they did is they implemented a thing that allows you, like, if you have one property of all of the different unions, you can distinguish based on this property. Obviously, this property must be hard-coded, or maybe it's not obvious, but it must be hard-coded and must be for the compiler at compile time distinguishable. So you can put anything there. You can say like status is 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, but it must be clearly distinguishable that like draft and draft could not be here, because otherwise like the compiler will throw a warning and say like I cannot work with this because there's like I cannot distinguish it. Yeah, and then you can basically implement on this prop status like we have seen in the presentation before, where you can say simply basically it's like if it's a draft, then I show only the content. If it's published, then I show the content and published at. Cool. So what does this mean for usage? So here we have a post. It's with status draft. We pass in the content. Perfect. Let's do this. Let's change it to published. What will TypeScript will tell us is, okay, cool, all good, but published at is missing. You cannot use it, like there's an error. So you have to use published at. Add it, you create a new date. So far so good. And suddenly everything is green again. No need to go into the component, no docs and so on and so forth. Really good experience. What happens if we change back to draft? That's very interesting. It doesn't complain that published at, I think I have to rerun this. If we change it back to draft and have published at assigned, that's very interesting. It doesn't warn us. Although we clearly say we didn't expect it. I mean, it's not too big of a problem. It's just like, it would be nice if it would tell us, hey, you are passing something in that that is like, that shouldn't be there. And so now, I think it's coming, changing to draft, and it's not complaining. But that's because we have it in one of the union variations. But if passing something else, some other name, then it can figure it out, because it's not part of any of the union versions. So there's like yeah, TypeScript would be nice if you could do better, but actually I'm happy with you. You're like you're okay here. So how does this whole thing is named? It's called Discriminated Unions. So if you see this or hear this, and that's the thing. Like now I'm telling you about props, but props are just objects, so you can do this anywhere all the time. It's really useful. Compared to the example before, though, there's like one important thing in terms of like syntax or so addition. Basically, we can't only do content and published add. We have to add one property, the discriminant. It's like it's a needed thing just because TypeScript. This is the only way for TypeScript to make this distinguishing. Yeah. That said, last thing about TypeScript in this example is like I put the props directly on the component. Obviously, you can also do a variation, and that might make more sense in terms of design. But I wanted to show you that it really works on the props itself as well. You might do do a post that is a union and pass it as like pass in the whole post. But it still works exactly the same way. You pass in the post, and if you have draft and if you have published and the published ad would be missing, it would still give you this warning and tell you exactly that something is wrong. Let's look at Flow. Flow has exactly the same thing. It's like you can do unions. It looks the same. The only thing that is different in Flow, you don't have interfaces. You only have types. So you declare type, not an interface. There's like no difference at all. It's like the same implementation. The only thing is, in this case, Flow is a bit more correct, or like it's TypeScript allowed me to not return create a default case, and Flow said you have to have it. I'm not sure, because I covered all the cases. Maybe TypeScript was smart enough that it don't need a default case. I'm not too deep into the woods to actually tell you, but Flow basically told me I have to have this. And null is a valid React component. A React component can return null, so React element. So that's fine. Cool. Let's look at the experience. We do the same thing. We change the post to published. We get an error message, and then we have to add obviously the published ad. That's pretty cool. So far so good. Now let's do something. We change it to draft published ad. Same experience as with TypeScript. It works. And it shows no error. Even like in this case, Flow doesn't show an error for something. It's like, but something is not part of the props in any way. And this I find then, like, I find it annoying, because if this is something where people could trip up. It's like I'm passing in. I could make a typo here. Pass something in that is unexpected, or not. Nah, it's not too much about the typo, but in general, it's like, if I'm passing something in that has absolutely no effect in no version of this in any case, this is like, just let me know. Can we make this happen? Yes. So Flow has something. Well, I'm not exactly sure. It's exact objects or so. What? Sealed objects. Perfect. So you can basically say like, this must be exactly this structure. So you basically add these pipe characters, and let's look at the experience. If we change to published, obviously we need to add published ad. Cool, thank you very much. No error. Now if we change to draft, it tells us, hey, there's something wrong. You're passing in a property that I don't expect. The same for something. So this is exactly the experience I'm looking for. There's one additional information related to that, that Flow actually decided to move its standard way. So if you watch this talk in a couple months again, you probably won't need this, because they migrating the Flow to be exact always. It's general tendency that I see more often, or like. Personally, that's my personal observation, that TypeScript and Flow becoming stricter and stricter over time, and the community adopts with it. At least that's where I see with all my clients, where yeah, we add more rules that we can make it stricter and stricter, and these rules are only available over time. Cool. One thing to note, in Flow it's called disjoint union. So discriminated unions in TypeScript is the same thing as disjoint unions in Flow. If you ask me why, I don't know. But in the end, you have the same structure. It's like, just use it and be happy with it. Yeah. One thing about the about Flow, about this example, this example where you see an error for a specific case. This is where some people talk about the quality of a type system. It's like, where does it bail out? Where does it cannot actually help you anymore, although you expect it to help? This is what they mean. For a long time, I couldn't find examples or understand what they actually mean with quality of type system, but this is what it is about. There's like, yeah. Obviously, with Flow, you can also do this. You basically paste in a post as an object. Let's look at Reason. At Reason, we have, I told you, have this union thing built into the language, and you can create a type post that has these special things. They are called tags or constructors. They're not like object or class constructors. They're like, just call them tags. That's fine. But you basically can not only say it like an enum is like this or that, but you can also say it's like this or that, but with something in it. So you describe, there's a string in there. There's no native date type in Reason, so I just use a timestamp, which is fine. Then this might look funky if you're not familiar with Reason, but basically in the end, there's one thing I cannot do this. There's like one thing about Reason. I cannot do this on the props directly. I basically right away have to go to this design where I only accept the post in, because we don't get an object in Reason. We only get labeled arguments, like named arguments, parameters actually. And then, but it's the same thing. You just have a switch expression in this case, and you can basically pattern match on, like, if it's this, then do that. If it's this, do that. The one really important benefit about this one, that you have this, if you miss one case, Reason will tell you right away. This is what the previous speaker talked about, like exhaustive matching. Cool. Let's look at the experience. So we have drafts. We basically pass in our content. If we change to published, it will tell us, hey, you're missing something. So I pass in a timestamp. If I change back to drafts, it tells me right away, hey, this is not correct. So it's very basically where Flow is going with this exact objects. Forgot the name again. Is like it's built into Reason in the core right away, because they are very they care about correctness. Cool. So they call variants. So discriminated unions, disjoint unions, or variants, or aka tagged unions, as used in computer science, it serves the same purpose with different ways of getting there in the implementation. One thing that is nice about the Reason version, I mean, it looks completely different, so you mightn't be used to it, but you don't need this extra status thing. It's like you just can get rid of it, and you don't have to pass an extra pop. So does this stop with props? Now we have, like, as you've seen, like before, until now, it was a lot about, like, I mean, adding some properties that is like, you can have this property and this property and this property, and they're completely unrelated. That's a no-brainer. But until now, it was a lot about this or that or that. And this doesn't stop with props. You can actually make this make this happen with render props again. And I know hooks are the new thing. I like them a lot as well. But you can also do this with hooks. In general, actually, you can do this with any API design. But I just wanted to give you one more example to see where this actually can loop into. So let's look at the real world example, TypeScript, Apollo query component. So Apollo gives us data, loading, error. Oh, so error should be errors. Made a mistake here, but basically when using TypeScript, you have to say like, or you can say if it's loading, then return loading. If it's error, return the error. If it's and that's quite interesting because we know from the doc. So if you look at the code, that if error is loading is false, error is false, there is data, but TypeScript doesn't know because there's no contract between these properties, so it doesn't understand. So you explicitly have to tell, well, data is not undefined or not null, so I return null in this component. So then you actually get to the point where you can show or whatever you want to show. The major problem with this is, so TypeScript doesn't understand it, and the cause of this is that this is actually a design that can lead to impossible states. Because if you, like, as I said, for example, if loading and error is both false, data must be there. That's the internal contract or the internal implementation of this component. But there's also other cases where it's like, at the moment, if loading is true, there can't be data. This is how it's implemented. You're like, what? Why do you even make then giving the render prop free properties back that are like completely disconnected? So bad Apollo. Preview, there is a reason, but I will let you know in a bit. So that's what they do, and this is really annoying, especially writing this all the time. And this is actually like, this is impossible. Like, you should never ever get there. And if it happens, it's like completely unexpected. So actually, I think in this case, the better implementation would be return and throw an error, because it's like it shouldn't happen. But just that I have to write this in every component, then like overhead. So how would a different design look like? In the render prop, we can also return simply a result, which in TypeScript is a discriminated union, and then we can check on the type, and if it's loading, then we show loading. If it's error, then we show error, and then we if it's data, then we render the data. The interesting aspect of this is, in addition, that Apollo query is written in TypeScript, so I can do an asset never here and actually check that this is never happening at compile time. So I'm checking against the implementation and against the type system, and that's pretty cool. You can leave out the default if you, you could throw an error here, but in the end, like, the benefit that you gain out of this, it's way more clear that is like, it's loading or error or data, and you can't have anything, any other state at this point. And I wanna. So is this fictional? No. We actually using this with a client. So I'm consulting, freelancing. I do. I'm basically help at the moment 3 different companies. I'm usually like 1 to 2 days with them, and like 10 to 20 people, and help them solve problems they have with infrastructure architecture, and do workshops. And like one of them, I showed them discriminated unions, and we started to improve the props design of their components over time. And then, but I never thought about this design here in the render props thing. And then one of them came and was like, "Hey, actually, we can do this with the render props." And he fixed it. And he basically made this TS React Apollo, which is just a wrapper around React Apollo, taking the same thing and fixing this use case. Data loading error, returns it just input a different package, you get result, and it's done. And it's like couple lines of code, because you just take everything from Apollo React, you spread it out, and you just fix this one property. And this is like really, really neat, because you can take anything that's out there that you find like, yeah, it's okay, but could be better. You just fix it yourself with a handful of lines of code, and you can make the experience for your whole team. And if you have 10, 20 people that are working with this every day, it makes a difference. Cool. So they're Eversports, and if you would be kind to give them some love, some stars, that would be cool. They're not so used to open source, so I'm trying to push them into it. And it's like they have cool internal stuff, and I'm like trying to get them to release more of the stuff publicly, because it's good stuff and it's good to have outside. Yeah. I don't have the Flow version. I ran out of time preparing for the slides. But this is the Reason version. In Reason, we have Reason Apollo, which does exactly the same thing. It basically wraps Reason React and gives you the same thing for Reason. And this is actually there for quite a while. I told you there's an edge case. So why did they do this design? There's a property on the Apollo React Apollo query, says notify on network status change. So basically, that's the thing. If you have this property set to true, then you could, on the first load, every loading is true, then error is false and no data, and then you basically load the result. But if you load an error, there's like loading is false, error is true, there's no data. But then if you have a refetch button, during the refetch, the error could still be true and you're loading at the same time. So this is like it's a special edge case that's like only if you have refetch and you have this property set, then there's this explicit case where you want it, or where this like edge case can happen. There's still a couple of impossible cases in this design, but there is this one case, or like there's a handful of cases where what could happen. Like data and loading could be true, error and loading could be true, but a data and error at the moment in Apollo cannot be true at the same time. So what does this mean for this design? What we think of is like, this is our 99% use case. We have so we make this one query component where we cover exactly this and set notify, what is this? Notify on network status change to false. And then we make one extra component where this is set to true, and we do the same thing, but with like these two more extra cases that can happen. And then it's very explicit, because you can, like, okay, if error is true and loading is true, you can basically make a case is like loading and error. You just write it down as a string, you make another part of the union. But the thing is, the user that uses that, it's very explicit that like, oh, there is this extra case that I need to be careful with, because otherwise with this design, you could completely mess up. You could miss it. For example, if I have the error before loading, and then if they have the error before loading, and you click refetch, you don't even know if it's loading now or not. And there's like, if you don't, like the props design, or in this case the render prop design, has a large impact on how your developers can actually create a better experience. All right, final thing. When do you actually should care about these things and really think about it and spend time? If you ask me during my normal workday, it's like the more usage and complexity, it's linear, type your code. If I'm stressed and there's a deadline, then so it depends a bit. It's basically more like this. And if you ping me tonight when I'm drunk, then it's probably more like this. And I definitely think you should type all the time and care about these things. And that's the end. Follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much. Good one.